if you were to study the passages of Scripture that you read, you are probably guilty, as am I, of subconsciously cutting out sections of the Scriptures that we don't like and we don't feel, and turning the Bible into our own personal promise book of the bits that we like that make Jesus the kind of person that we want him to be. Tim Keller says if your God never disagrees with you, you might just be worshiping an idealized version of yourself. And Anne Lamott says you can safely assume that you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people that you do as well. Who is Jesus? Which Jesus are you following? Whose disciple are you? Well, it is hard to figure out how to follow Jesus in these crazy times. It's hard to figure out what Jesus would say. It's hard to even ask the question, does the Bible speak to the major issues that we're wrestling with in our culture? Let me just give you some of the crazy contradictions that are happening in our culture in the last little while. We have the rise of gay rights and also the rise of the alt-right at the same time. We have the first African American president in our history, followed by the election of Donald Trump. We have the loss of religious liberty for bakers and pizza shop owners and the election of the Supreme Court of a pro-religious liberty Supreme Court justice at the same time. There's the decline of the church and the rise of the nuns and the rise of mega churches and celebrity pastors. A pastor is told to step down because he's in his early 20s and he makes a move on a 17-year-old girl. Heartbreaking and tragic. At the same time, in Hollywood, Call Me By My Name is a film celebrating a relationship with a teenage boy, underage, and a man in his 20s at the same time. We have the Me Too movement rushing through our world at the exact same moment that Shades of Grey, picturing domination of a woman, sexual domination, is the fastest and largest selling book amongst women of all time. We have the rise of hate speech and the defending of free speech. We have the normalization and obsession with technology and a desire to get rid of it in our lives at the exact same time. Is there anybody here that understands what is happening in our world? Do you feel these tensions in your own life? It just feels like things are just going from one side to the other. And so a lot of people, when they look at the person of Jesus and try and figure out how am I going to become his disciple, feel like they just can't get Jesus from walking around the dusty trails of Galilee into modern Manhattan. Like, how does he just come here and sort this mess out? Well, I just have two very simple goals as we kick off the Controversial Jesus series tonight. The first goal is to help you understand our cultural moment, just so that you have some sort of framework or understanding of what's happening. And I'm not presenting these, I'm trying to present these as neutrally as possible, merely as observations, so you can be aware of the conversation that we're in. And then secondly, I want to introduce into that clarified conversation the scandalous compassion of Jesus Christ as a way forward for the church. So let's start by talking about following Jesus in this confusing cultural moment. I want to start by giving you 4 things that I think have drastically changed that make it very, very hard for us to have a conversation with our culture and figure out our own discipleship. The first one is there has been a very, very real change in our understanding of ourselves. What does it mean to be a person, a human in the world today? We're living in what Charles Taylor, who I will borrow from extensively in this opening section, what he calls the age of authenticity. The supreme value in our culture is being your authentic self. John Stuart Mill, who in some sense is the thought father of modern radical individualism, says, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. So Taylor goes on and he says this, I mean the understanding of life which emerges with the romantic expressivism of the late 18th century, that each one of us has his or her way of realizing our humanity, and that it is important to find and live out one's own as against surrendering to conformity with a model imposed on us from outside by society or the previous generation of religious or political authority. So, 5 things, he says, define the age of authenticity. Number 1, we no longer bow to external morals. Now, this is a fascinating shift because I'm not quite sure, though my anthropology certainly could use a dusting up, but I'm not quite sure that there has been a society in history that hasn't established a set of external norms and then championed individuals conforming themselves to these shared cultural values. Even ancient Greek had the concept of the classical Greek virtues. Christians had, at a minimum, faith, hope, and love. But in our modern culture, any external virtue that is imposed on you feels like it's an oppression to be thrown off. And so culture exists then, not to get you to take whatever disordered, whatever is happening in your heart, and then to chip away so that you're conformed to the image of a societal ideal. But now society is a blank canvas for you to express whatever happens to be in you out there. This is a major shift in our culture.